Today, some of our best segments from the Global Lane.
Syrian Christians under fire. Who will protect them? Tragedy has struck this ancient Christian community once again. Just days ago, an armed jihadist opened fire and detonated a suicide vest at St. Elia's church on the outskirts of Damascus, where Christians had gathered for worship. 24 people were killed, leaving the Christian community in mourning and shock. This raises an important question. Was this a rare occurrence, or is the threat of annihilation for Syria's Christian minority growing? Will Ahmed al-Shara's HTS government make a difference? What more can be done to protect Christians from persecution and atrocities like the recent incident in Damascus? The future of Syria and the potential impact of its new government on the country's Christians were topics of discussion at a recent Coptic Solidarity panel held in Washington, D.C. Several prominent U.S. and Syrian analysts provided compelling insights during this event. Creating a stable Middle East necessitates the protection of ancient minority faith communities. This week, I wanted to share some of the key points from that discussion. First up was David Schenker, former U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for Near Eastern Affairs, who now serves as a senior fellow and director of the program on Arab politics at the Washington Institute. He noted that while the Assad regime had a relatively benign approach to religious minorities, Assad was responsible for the deaths of 500,000 Syrians and drove 12 million people into exile, many of whom were Christians. So what about Ahmed al-Shara, the new leader of Syria? Can the former al-Qaeda operative and founder of the militant Islamic group al-Nusra be trusted to better protect Syria's religious minorities, especially Christians?
Now, al-Shara himself may turn out to be a wolf in sheep's clothing, but he said a lot of the right things to date. He's met with U.S. congressmen who left the meetings reassured, or at least optimistic, that the new government is pragmatic and might be tolerant, and that there will be some respect for human rights and religious freedom. The Republicans, more than the Democrats, were very optimistic about the trajectory of Syria under al-Shara. But some of the things that are happening really do not inspire confidence. We saw the massacre of Alawites. Former regime members have been targeting the Druze community. We've seen members of designated U.S. designated terrorist organizations that perpetrated atrocities against Kurds being assigned as senior-level military officers in Hasaka, in Kurdish areas.
Can a leopard truly change his spots? National security and foreign affairs analyst Ryan Morrow is an investigative researcher at the Capital Research Center, where he covers extremist groups. He asserts that Western governments often face difficult choices once a dictator is overthrown. Following the removal of Bashar al-Assad from power, American officials and media members quickly promoted Ahmed al-Shara to fill the leadership void in Syria.
Maybe there's some incentives that will make him not be as horrible. We should welcome that. Always welcome things that go in the right direction. Positive reinforcement is important. But that doesn't mean you have to capitulate to a terrorist who, frankly, I'm not even sure he's going to be there in power in a few years. I mean, I'm hearing people talk about this interim government as if they won an election already and are going to be in power for 20 years, so you better deal with them and accept them. Well, what is his political constituency? Can anybody tell me? Because the al-Qaeda-type Salafists hate him because he, to his credit, his forces, after he left al-Qaeda, did fight an al-Qaeda affiliate there, so they don't like him. He's not extreme enough. The other Salafists will, and he's a Salafist himself, will call him an apostate who deserves death because he is participating in democracy and elections, and he calls it democracy, and that's a man-made process. The punishment for that is death. All right, so he lost that constituency. So who's left? Oh, the Muslim Brotherhood? You know, maybe he's moving in that direction because it's been so successful. No, they're not going to accept him either because he's talking about normalizing ties with Israel. And even if it's a trick, he's gone way too far. He's taken a step beyond what they would even say is permissible by deception. And all of a sudden, it's all this optimistic talk, and it's being obscured by groups, particularly 501c3 nonprofits in the United States, who are giving Ahmed al-Shara the fastest makeover of a public figure I have ever seen in my career of over 20 years. I never thought I would come to a day where a former leader of an al-Qaeda branch in Syria, with maybe hours difference between when he was officially al-Qaeda and no longer was, could suddenly be celebrated as a guy who saw the light. Come on, Hollywood studios for celebrities can't pull that off. They usually have to go away for a while and then come back.
Up next, Syrian Christians have faced killings and persecution by militant Islamists and even Kurds in northeast Syria. They do not believe that the new Syrian government will protect them. They're one of the world's ancient Christian communities, and they're facing the threat of extinction. Syrian Christians have little reason to trust Syria's HTS government to protect them. At a recent Coptic Solidarity panel discussion on Syria, Syrian human rights advocate Asharena Abraham, a representative of the Syrian International Council, detailed the suffering of Christians living in northeast Syria and highlighted the failure of Kurdish militias to protect them from Islamic State jihadists.
The night ISIS entered Assyrian villages, the Khabra River swelled, and in the chaos, high-ranking Kurdish officials rushed to seize lands in Qamishli. They set up offices in Assyrian homes while families feared for their lives. When confronted and asked why they were not fighting, multiple members of my family were told point blank, "We will not sacrifice ourselves for filthy Christians." We saw this in Iraq when the Kurdish Peshmerga, or those who fight death, disarmed Assyrians and Yazidis 2 weeks before ISIS and abandoned 7 critical posts without firing a single bullet, leaving us to slaughter, only coming back to follow Western forces and paint a picture of protection. How are we expected to place our faith in regimes like this? How can the world believe they are our defenders? Those who leave us to slaughter and silence while building false narratives as our protectors will never be guardians of peace because they are among the many architects of our erasure. International actors hail the Kurdish administration as a sanctuary for Christians, promoting a future Kurdish state built on the bones of indigenous Christians and branding it a beacon of tolerance in a fractured region. But like the fig tree Jesus cursed, lush in appearance yet barren at its core, this administration wears the guise of protection while ripping out the very roots of indigenous Assyrian Christian existence. On the ground, Assyrians are not equals. We are threatened into silence or risk disappearance and death. Our schools were shut down for refusing to adopt a politicized curriculum that glorifies the PKK, rewrites Assyrian history, and turns education into an instrument of indoctrination. 15% of Assyrian lands in the AENES-controlled areas have been confiscated. Over 1,400 homes and farms remain illegally occupied in the Khabra River Valley. The SDF digs trenches on our churches and cemeteries, militarizing our sacred Christian spaces to provoke brutal, relentless Turkish retaliation. We don't want war where we worship. We don't want to be pawns in someone else's war. We don't want our churches turned into battlegrounds to manufacture illusions that one regime protects us while another attacks us, manipulating our suffering for Western backing at the expense of our existence. We don't want to balkanize Syria, but we want a foundation for sustainability where Assyrians can manage local governance, education, security, and cultural preservation without fear of interference or demographic manipulation. International aid, oversight, and recognition must support this initiative, not as a favor, but as an overdue corrective to decades of disenfranchisement. There is legal precedent for this. Under the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples have the right to self-determination. We do not ask to be rescued, we just want to be recognized. We want our indigenous rights. We want human rights. We cannot have meaningful conversations about protecting Christians if we are not listening to genuine Christian voices, those who are not speaking under the very real threat of death in front of the very regimes persecuting us. If we remain silent now, this pattern of murder and injustice will continue until the very last Assyrian in Syria is dead or gone, and every road of our homeland is once more fractured, and regimes continue to pave over our freshly dead, bloody bodies. A community who still speaks the language of Jesus and whose evangelistic force spread Christianity from India to China will be a footnote in history. If we care about protecting Christians, we must stop applauding the hands that strangle us, stop funding the systems that erase us, and start standing with the people who have historically fought for all marginalized groups and now have been abandoned to fight alone just to stay alive while the world turns away from us and tokenizes our suffering to advance their corrupted agendas.
What do Syrian Christians expect from the new government? What changes would they like to see to ensure their rights and security? Bassem Ishak, a member of the Syrian Democratic Council, emphasizes that for Syria to genuinely transition to a pluralistic future, the rights and dignity of religious minorities must be protected.
There remains a vacuum in clear legal protection for religious minorities. Without a political framework such as a Bill of Rights and without a strong independent judiciary, the rule of law and the protection of Christian property rights and business, Syrian Christians risk soft ethnic cleansing and eventual uprooting. Syrian Christians are not passive victims. They are adapting, evolving, and increasingly engaging in civic and political life. A new generation of Christian youth, many raised amid war and exile, are participating in society with a vision of inclusive citizenship. We see Christians-led NGOs providing aid, interfaith initiative promoting reconciliation, and efforts to draft inclusive local charters that ensures freedom of belief, ask for equal property rights, and minority protections. This shift from a defensive minority posture to active citizenship is perhaps one of the most hopeful signs of this transitional moment. So, what is my conclusion and recommendations? First, constitutional guarantees. The new constitution must enshrine full religious freedom, equal citizenship, and the protection of heritage sites and institutions. Second, political inclusion. Christians and other minorities must have proportional representation in governance, especially the local level where they reside. Third, international support. The international community must support minority return programs, protect vulnerable religious communities, and fund neutral civil society initiatives. Finally, fourth, truth and reconciliation. A national healing process must include the stories of all communities, including Christians, who suffered like other Christians, Syrians, under Assad tyranny and the internal war of the last 13 years. In closing, a young Christian lawyer in training summed it up for me. She told me last summer, while I was visiting in northeast Syria, we don't want to hear about democracy anymore. Armed conflict has made it irrelevant to our situation. Tell them we yearn for justice, equality, and the dignity that God bestowed on us all.
Up next, what to expect from the Trump administration on Syria and what the world must do to protect Syrian Christians from extinction. President Trump has formally lifted financial and economic sanctions on Syria, drawing closer to Syrian President Ahmed el-Shara. At a recent Coptic Solidarity Conference on Capitol Hill, former Assistant Secretary of State for Near Eastern Affairs David Schenker argued that the first Trump administration prioritized the protection of Middle Eastern Christians. This time, Trump is expected to stress the importance of U.S. investment in Syria, while urging the new Syrian president to safeguard religious rights.
Trump's second administration is not fully staffed up as yet. We've seen Secretary of State and National Security Advisor now, I guess, Marco Rubio make a number of comments about Syrian Christians. He's expressed support for all of Syria's minorities and singled out Christians. He said the United States stands with Syria's religious and ethnic communities, including Christian, Druze, Alawite, and Kurdish communities, and urged the government to hold perpetrators of violence against minority communities accountable. After a meeting with Shabani, the foreign minister of Syria, once again, Rubio underscored the critical importance of protecting human rights of all Syrians, regardless of ethnicity or religion. But as with the first Trump administration, in the second, I think the real advocate for Christian protections of Christians in the region is going to be also the vice president, J.D. Vance. He's spoken a number of times to date since taking office and even before about the situation of Christians in the region. In February of 25, he said, part of protecting religious freedom initiatives means recognizing in our foreign policy the difference between regimes that respect religious freedom and those that do not. The United States must be able to make that distinction, and we must be able to look at the catastrophes like the plight of Iraq's Christians over the past 3 decades and possess the moral clarity to act when something has gone wrong. He also talked in specific about Syrian Christians in an interview with Laura Ingraham. We don't want another Christian community erased from the face of the earth, he said. We are talking already to our allies, and we're doing things in private to try and encourage them to protect the minorities, the Christian minorities, and so forth. The administration is saying the right things. I think they get it. I think we all understand that. They understand the threat to the community. The question is what they're going to do about it.
The Mediterranean coast of Syria has tremendous economic opportunities. So those who support the Christians, the Alawites, the Druze, in developing a new future for themselves, have a lot to gain. They can't offer a new Air Force One, but if they have to, they can offer a new Trump Towers. They can offer a new Trump golf course. If that's the language we got to talk about, that politicians and American companies can benefit from the economic prosperity that would come with excluding the Iranian regime, the former Assad regime, the Russians, HTS from an area, if that's what we got to do. Most Iraqis I talk to agree with this. There should be an autonomous province or region for the Christians, the Yazidis, and the other minorities in Iraq. That seems obvious to me. It's bizarre to me that that hasn't happened. I'm also long on record as saying an independent Kurdistan should be the official objective of U.S. foreign policy. Maybe not everyone agrees with me on that, but it's kind of inevitable. And there are enough pro-American elements there that, just like in any other situation, I would say try to empower those. Try and shape the situation instead of just saying we don't like that outcome that you're not going to be able to stop.
What do you see as a solution to this ISIS presence in Syria?
We're even seeing Salafist ideology in the university students when they're going into these Christian neighborhoods and calling for jihad. We need to really back the vulnerable communities, whether they're indigenous or religious minorities, and really give them a platform to participate in governance, and not just on paper, but actually have a voice without external interference, and we need to back them so we actually can have peaceful coexistence.
We want Shara to succeed at having a moderate government that he may or may not have, but I think the general view is that if he doesn't succeed, what comes next will be worse.
Indigenous minorities in North Africa and the Middle East are facing extinction. So what can be done about it? Former Virginia Congressman Frank Wolf has some ideas. He's been fighting for religious freedom for years. At the recent Coptic Solidarity Conference in Washington, Wolf scolded American Christians and others for not getting involved.
I personally am speaking for myself. I've been disappointed in a lack of interest and action by the church in the West. During the Civil Rights Movement, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King expressed it well. Dr. King said, and I quote Dr. King, he said, "In deep disappointment, I have wept over the laxity of the church. Dr. King went on to say, so often the contemporary church is a weak, ineffectual voice with an uncertain sound. The war in Europe against the Nazis began in 1939, but the seeds of virulent anti-Semitism, which led to the Holocaust, were sown in the early 1930s by the Nazis. They were sown in 1931, 1932, 1933, 1934, 1935, 1936, 1937, 1938, and the world stood by. The world stood by and did, frankly, nothing. William Wilberforce said this to his fellow countrymen about the evils of the slave trade. Wilberforce said, you may choose to look the other way, but you can never say again you do not know. Nobody in Congress can say they do not know. Nobody in the Trump administration can say they do not know. Nobody in the State Department can say they do not know. Nobody in the church, if you read the Washington Times, the New York Times, the Washington Post, you can't say you don't. You can't say you don't know. The second quote is from a friend of German Lutheran pastor and anti-Nazi dissident, Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Dietrich Bonhoeffer said, silence in the face of evil is evil itself. If you see something going on and you don't say anything, how do you do? It's evil not to speak. What would Jesus do if he were me today? I believe Jesus would be helping the persecuted Christians and other religious minorities in the Middle East and opposing the hate of anti-Semitism. The Trump administration should be doing the same. The State Department should be doing the same. The Congress should be doing the same. The church should be doing the same. And we all should be doing the same. Thank you very much.
WWJD. Well, that's it today from the Global Lane. Until next time, be blessed.